Warning: 50 Most may contain content that is not suitable for all viewers or listeners. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. Hi everyone, welcome to 50 Most, where I am going to be taking you this season through the 50 most haunted places across all 50 states. And I am going to knit while I tell you the story. Now, for any of the resources that I use for each episode, you can see all of those in the description below. And without further ado, we will get started on our story today. Now, our first story is going to take us all the way to Birmingham, Alabama. Now, I don't know tons about Alabama, but I know that they got some good soul food, and that delicious barbecue. And I know that they have the Sloss Furnaces, which are supposed to be hella haunted. Now, the Sloss Furnaces came about from a man named Colonel James Withers Sloss. And this was following the Civil War. A lot of the railroadman, land developers, and speculators moved into Jones Valley, Alabama, to take advantage of the mineral and material-rich resources in the area. So this was before Birmingham was even established as the city that it is today. Now, in 1871, Southern entrepreneurs founded Birmingham so they could take advantage of exploiting the materials in the area like coal, limestone, dolomite, and clay, which were very abundant in that area. So our grand champion of this story, James Withers Sloss, was born on April 7th in 1820 in Limestone County. He was born to Joseph and Clarissa Sloss near Moores Valley in Limestone County. And growing up, James didn't have tons of formal education, but he did apprentice for a butcher shop, and through that became pretty business savvy. And then in 1842, when he was 22 years old, he bought his own general store in Athens, Alabama. I believe it was Alabama anyway. And then married Mary Bigger. Now, James was pretty successful in his business adventures and was able to expand his homestead into a successful plantation. This was the South. Are we surprised? No. Through that, it was through his plantation and his business ventures that he became one of the richest men in the state of Alabama. And during the Civil War, he served in the Confederate Army in 1867 and was made president of the Nashville and Decatur Railroad, which then later became the Louisville and Nashville Railroad System. After the war, he was given the title Colonel, kind of more as a, not really a war title, but kind of a, we're going to give this to you to make you feel a little fancy. And he became one of the leading figures in helping to grow Alabama's industrial development. In 1871, he persuaded the L&N to extend its line to the newly founded city of Birmingham. And this investment did help transform Birmingham into what was then later called the Magic City, for how quickly the city was established and growing. You know, I feel like if that's what you're calling your city, yeah, it's a pretty good name, pretty good nickname. Could be worse, could be better maybe. I don't know. In 1876, James Sloss and James Thomas leased the Oxmoor Furnace. And he then joined the Eureka Mining and Transportation Company with the hopes of producing coke pig iron in Birmingham. Then in 1878, Sloss, alongside his business partner Henry de Bartleby and Truman Aldrich, founded the Pratt Coal and Coke Company. And no, it is not Coke like Coca-Cola. It would later become one of the largest mining operations in the district of Birmingham. It's pretty big. Through the company, Sloss was able to show the people in Alabama that iron could in fact be made in Birmingham. Didn't know that that was a question, but here we are. With the capital that he had from Henry, he then was able to found the Sloss Furnace Company in 1881. He began erecting what they called the City of Furnace, which, as we know today, is the Sloss Furnaces. Now, you can look at this area online on their website, and let me tell you, it's huge. This is a huge area. You can do like virtual tour and look at all of the different photos, and you're looking at it for hours. In the early years of these Sloss Furnaces, the construction began in June in 1881, and that was when ground was officially broken on the 50-acre site that was donated to them by the Ilton Land Company. And this is when we have Harry Hargreaves join our story. Now, he was a European-born engineer, and he was the man in charge of constructing the Sloss Furnaces. And Harry was a pupil of Thomas Whitwell, who was a British inventor who designed the stoves that would then supply the hot air blasts for these new furnaces. And these furnaces stood at 60 feet high and 18 feet in diameter, which is huge, just massive, by God. And these were what they called the new Whitwell stoves. And they were the first of their type to have ever been built in Birmingham. So, he's doing some pretty new things in the area, bringing in Harry to kind of help create this massive stove and to do stuff that people weren't necessarily doing. So being pretty innovative when you think about it. I'm not sure if that was necessarily the best thing, because as anyone who has learned about the Industrial Revolution just in any area, you also know that this came with a lot of dangers. So at the time, they were innovative for what was being built in the South, and it was very similar to what was already being built in the northern part of the U.S. And during the time of their construction, the local people... Sorry, my yarn is getting stuck. During the time of their construction, a lot of the local people were proud that most of the machinery used for the Sloss Furnaces would be manufactured in the South. So this included 2 of the blowing engines and 10 of the boilers, which I feel like that's a pretty big deal. And you're like, hey, this is all locally sourced materials. This is going to be great for the local economy, all that jazz. Then in April 1882, the furnaces went into blast, which is just a fancy way of saying they fired them up. So after the first year of operations, the furnace had sold up to 24,000 tons of iron. That's a lot of iron. And at the 1883 Louisville Exposition, the company won a bronze medal for best pig iron. So I guess they could technically boast that they were one of the best in the country. Pretty big deal. Pretty big deal. And then in 1886, only a few short years at the company, James Sloss retired, and he then sold the company to a group of financiers who then guided it through a period of rapid expansion. And this is when things kind of take a turn, with the acquisition of additional furnaces, extensive mineral lands in the northern Alabama area. Sloss Sheffield, which was now their new name, they became the second largest merchant pig iron company in the Birmingham district. Now, James later died in May of 1890, but he still continued to have a deep interest in iron and steel making until the day he died. Good for him. It's good to have hobbies. And I guess his hobby was steel and iron. And then the company reorganized in 1899 and rebranded as Sloss Sheffield Steel and Iron, which is kind of funny because they never made steel. Iron, yes. Steel, no. And then with the acquisition of 3 additional furnaces and extensive mineral lands in the north, in northern Alabama, Sloss Sheffield became the second largest merchant of pig iron in the Birmingham district. Then by World War I, they were among the largest producers of pig iron. That's pretty impressive. I'm gonna say that's impressive. Good for them. Good for them. And they were one of the largest producers in the world. In the world. They went from like the biggest in the state, or like district, state, world. They were going places. Good for them. Good for them. Then in the late 1930s, World War II expanded the market for iron and steel, which created jobs for a lot of people in the Birmingham area. And despite having a larger black labor force, they were still super segregated. And that means that they had segregated jobs, segregated bathhouses, they punched in on separate time clocks, and attended separate company picnics. And that was until about the 1960s before they, kind of had to not segregate because, the civil rights movement. But I digress. The company was operated as a hierarchy with, the top being a group of managers, chemists, accountants, and engineers, most of them being white, and then at the bottom being an all-black labor gang, as they called it. And Sloss utilized the convict leasing system only in their coal mines. So basically, they're like, yeah, we'll allow anyone in the prison system to work for our coal mines, which, as we know, is paying them very little and basically having almost free labor. So, great. So great. Now, because this was the industrial era in United States history, and because this was a job that was considered extremely dangerous, a lot of people died. Lots of people died at these Sloss Furnaces. And most of them were from like industrial accidents. Those happened on like a regular basis. That would be anything from falling into the molten steel to being poisoned by carbon monoxide to being burned from steam pipes. Which, for anyone who doesn't know, a steam burn is worse. It's always worse. Although one of the most horrific deaths was while one of the workers was on his lunch break. He was sitting near one of the large flywheels, which was used to power the scalding boilers. And he leaned a little too close to this wheel. And it caught his clothing, which slowly dragged him into the gears over and over and drug him around and around and around until there was nothing left of him. Horrific. I know. That guy's definitely up in there haunting the wheels. Slowly like turns the night and you just like hear faint screams. Help me, help me. I know, I'm the worst. So then on September 9th, 1887, Richard Jowers, who was working at furnace number 1, I guess they were numbered 1 through however many they had, and as he was standing near the top of the furnace, he slipped. He was carrying a heavy bell, so he slipped with the bell, and both him and the bell fell into the molten steel below. So in other words, he melted. I think that is the only real way you can say that, is that he melted. It was rumored that they were able to remove his head and a few bones before he was completely lost to the furnace. But I feel like trying to pull someone out when they fall in is like, I feel like it's really risky. I don't know if I would risk that if I was in that situation. Probably be like, oh, sorry, Richard. Well, tell your wife and kids I'm sorry. Because, I mean, what can you do in that sort of situation where someone just falls in? You know, it's not like if someone falls into, like, a campfire, you can, like, put it out. I mean, even then, that's still, like, very horrific. I'm not saying either of those are good things, but I feel like in other instances, there's a bit more you can do, but for this, like, you can't stick something into the molten steel. It's just all gonna melt. You have to find something that has like a higher melting point, and that's just difficult, you know? That is difficult. Another story about the Sloss Furnaces is that in the 1900s they had James, so they called him Slag, Wormword, and he was the foreman of the graveyard shift. Now, it was known that Slag was known for being especially cruel and would often beat and belittle his crew, which, I mean, definitely let the power go to his head. Oh, that's totally what you want in, like, your boss in a workplace, someone who's on, like, a major power trip and is like, no one does it better than me. I mean, like, I feel like we've all had that manager in a workplace who thinks that they're so much better than everyone else, and, like, you know, they crack the whip, which, like, we all know that type of situation. But let's imagine that, but 100 times worse, because this person can actually hit you. At the time, you know, people got away with a lot of shit. And the graveyard shift was the period between sunset and sunrise, where they had a skeleton crew of nearly 150 workers. So that's on this 50-acre plot of land. And their job was basically just keep the furnaces fed and running throughout the night, which I feel like that's a pretty big job for basically as little people as possible to just keep things running. And during the summer months, temperatures throughout the plant would reach more than 120 degrees. So that is, God, it gets up to like 85 here in Colorado. That's the state that I live in. And I feel like I am melting, let alone in Alabama with the humidity. And it's just suffocatingly hot. Like, I feel like I myself don't like humidity because I feel like I get in there and I'm just drenched and drowning in like sweat. And it's just not a good time. I'm not a fan of humidity. And, oh God, especially in summer. Oh, I feel like that would just be, I'd feel like I'm dying probably. It'd feel like hell. Like you were just in the flames of hell. And a lot of people had more of a lack of sleep with the heat and the low visibility. It made working at the Sloss Furnaces feel like you are literally working in the pits of hell. You're in the belly of the fire, just melting. And realistically, only the poorest and most desperate for employment were the people who were willing to work the night shift, which at the time was mainly comprised of recent arrived immigrants to the U.S. Because, you know, like, you're coming to the U.S., you're like, I just got here. I'm going to take whatever job I can get. I got to feed my family. It makes me sad. Like, I hate that it takes advantage of that need for people, like, who just got here and are, like, trying to find their way. Anyways, they had no breaks, no holidays, and no time off. And the workers were forced to live in these cramped housing on the furnace site. So basically, you would be working and you could be forced to go back to work at any point in time. And if someone like Slag felt that you weren't working enough, they could basically make you work around the clock if they saw fit. And there, wasn't anyone to protect you from having 12-hour days and, actually having good pay instead of, like, a lot of these employees were paid with, like, coupons for the company store. I'm sorry, it's, like, such a shitty way to get paid. It's like, hey, you worked so hard. Here's fake money. Like, I'm sorry, what am I supposed to do with this? This does nothing for me. It's rude. It's rude. That's what it is. It's just rude. Fucking insulting. Because Slag was the brown noser that he would often cut corners during his shift and would make the people working under him take extreme risks that basically forced them to speed up production and, in a lot of ways, risking their lives. So, it was during his time on the night shift that by the time he was done, 47 workers lost their lives. Which I feel like he was not foreman for super long, so I feel like that's a lot of people. Like, okay, so he was foreman for like 6 years, 5.5, 6 years. So in that time, he lost 47 people. Like, starting to get to, like, almost one person a month type of deal. That's a lot. That's a lot of death. And workers were 10 times more likely to have some sort of mishap during the night shift than any of the other shifts at Sloss Furnaces. And, countless others lost their lives during accidents, and one of them was a small engine blow that left 6 workers burned and blind. It was in 1888. So, good old Slag here. Such a weird nickname, Slag. It feels sleazy. So in October 1906, during one of his shifts, he was at the top of one of the highest blast furnaces, which all of the workers had called Big Alice, during which he lost his footing and fell into a pool of melted iron, and he too melted, just almost instantaneously. Little ball of fire, gone, done. And some of the workers believe that he must have become dizzy from all of the methane gas and lost his balance. But people were kind of suspicious because he never set foot on top of a furnace during any of the other shifts. So what caused him to do it that time, nobody really knows. And some people started to speculate that his workers had had enough of him. He actually hadn't lost his footing, but they instead threw him in. But there is no evidence that that happened either. So nobody really knows what caused good old Slag Wormword to fall into the furnace. But it was soon after his death that they discontinued graveyard shifts because they said there were too many accidents and strange incidences that decreased their overall productivity, and they felt it was better to just not have those shifts anymore. It is believed that the Sloss Furnaces are haunted by all of the workers who have died there in numerous ways. But the biggest one being of James Slag Wormword. They had legends of him that grew stronger each year since his death and disappearance. And a lot of workers began to complain about this unnatural presence that they would encounter more and more when they worked there. Then in 1926, one of the night watchmen sustained injuries after he was pushed from behind. So that he was told by an angry man with a deep voice to get back to work. But upon searching the grounds, could not find a single other person there. He was alone. So who pushed him? It's a question. Question we don't have an answer to. Then in 1947, 3 supervisors went missing. They were later found unconscious in a locked boiler room in the southern part of the plant. None of them could explain what happened to them, how it happened, why they were there, but that a man whose skin appeared badly burned angrily shouted at them to push some steel. Most of them believed that this man was Slag. Then in 1971, the night before the plant officially closed and was no longer making steel, Samuel Blumenthal, one of the night watchmen, was taking one last look around the plant before saying goodbye, which I get the nostalgia and all of that. You've worked there for years. You've given all your time to this place, and it's like the last time you're ever going to be there. You might as well just kind of enjoy the time and, give it that one last goodbye. I would have done the same thing. And while he was doing that, he came face to face with what he described as the most frightening thing he had ever seen. And he described this as a half man, half demon who tried to push him up the stairs. And when he refused, the demonic man began to beat him with his fists. And he was later examined by a doctor who was Dr. Jack Barlow, and he found that he was in fact covered with intense burns and bruises, but couldn't definitively say what the cause of those were. And unfortunately, Samuel died before he ever returned to Sloss. And there have been more than 100 reports of suspected paranormal activity at Sloss Furnaces. And these are the reported incidences. There's probably hundreds more that people haven't reported. And this is everything from minor incidences, such as like steam whistles going off by themselves, to major sightings and the occasional rare assaults on the living. Most of them happen during the months of September to October, and most of them happen at night during what would have been the old graveyard shifts. Some of them are dismissed as Halloween hoaxes, while a lot of people believe it is the relentless spirit of the sadistic foreman Slag. Now, there have been numerous investigations that have taken place at Sloss Furnaces. In 1988, there was a study conducted by the Center for Paranormal Events, also called the CPE, and they found nothing out of the ordinary during this investigation, but many members of the team, and this included 2 psychics, claimed that due to the violent disregard for and loss of life, that the Sloss Furnaces should be a location that is filled with restless souls. So, first time around, they're like, we're not really seeing anything, but this should be super haunted. This place should be super haunted. Then in 2000, they were once again studied by the paranormal team, and this was by Fox's Scariest Places, in which they actually experienced a lot of paranormal activity, and they concluded it had one of the highest rates of unnatural energy that they have ever encountered. So, not really sure what happened in the 12 years between the first study and that one, but I don't know, maybe the ghost got a little more comfortable with not having people around and not having, work happening. In 2002, they were then investigated by a team from a CBS affiliate, WJTV, and they left Sloss Furnaces completely rattled and convinced without a doubt that the Sloss Furnaces are haunted. They captured various footage on their investigation as well. Then in 2003, the Alabama Foundation for Paranormal Research said that it was undoubtedly haunted. They found that the furnaces were a major hotspot for activity, and it was one of the most paranormally active places that their team has ever investigated at the time. Then on October 4th, 2003, one of the crew members for Fright Furnace, which is the company that does haunted tours of Sloss Furnaces, you can check them out today. I have their website listed below in the description. They actually had one of their crew members assaulted, and his name was Josh Thomas. He had worked at Sloss Furnaces for several years, and he suddenly caught fire. So, spontaneous combustion, I guess. And he said that it happened after he saw a strange shape. Cannot really describe what the shape was. And he suffered burns over his, entire body. And he was taken to the hospital for his injuries, but he had no recollection as to how exactly he caught on fire and what exactly happened other than, catching fire. And coincidentally enough, it was near the 32nd anniversary of the burn attack of Samuel Blumenthal. Coincidence? Maybe. Then in 2005, 2 psychic investigators came to investigate Sloss Furnaces. And in the middle of taping their show, one of them began to bleed from a cut that suddenly appeared on their right hand, which entirely halted their investigation. I don't believe that they ended up going back and continuing, unfortunately. Then in 2009, Unexplained Mysteries investigated Sloss Furnaces, and they were able to capture shadow movements and figures on film. Then in 2012, the team from Ghost Adventures visited, and they were physically assaulted on camera. And again, said assault was caught on camera. And in 2014, TAPS, which also known as Ghost Hunters, they visited Sloss Furnaces and captured what they believed to be phenomenal footage, providing that there is definitive spiritual activity at Sloss. They have since returned to capture even more footage and evidence since their original taping in 2014. Today, this building is considered a national landmark. It is a historic site, and you can go visit it today at your leisure. A lot of people still report having paranormal encounters. A lot of people see aspirations. They hear screaming, shadow figures, all that jazz. So that ultimately concludes our story. Now, I myself cannot say as to whether or not I think Sloss Furnaces is haunted, but I will leave that up to you. So, if you enjoyed today's story, please tune in next week where we are going to be traveling to New Hampshire. And if you like my stories, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up. And if you're interested in hearing more content similar to this, check out the other podcast that I host called Peculiar Pairings. That is on this same Peculiar Pairings network. And you can listen to our episodes every Sunday. So stay curious.